Hey everybody, it's Nick here from Greyscalegorilla. I am the gorilla, and today we're going to be making this using Cinema 4D, Redshift, and a couple Greyscalegorilla plugins. Now, today's tutorial is based on this animation that Apple created for their upcoming event. The artist who created this actually reached out on Twitter. His name's Gabriel Farajo, and he let us know that he's a big Greyscalegorilla fan, so that was awesome to see as well. So huge shout out to Gabriel and Apple for making this thing. And with that, let's head on in to Cinema 4D. All right, here we are in Cinema 4D, and the first thing we need is to grab a logo that we want to do this effect with. If you have your own logo, go ahead and use that. If you don't, you could find some online. Make sure it's more round. It tends to work better for this effect. If you don't have a logo, don't want to mess with finding one, just go over here and grab a circle, an end side, a flower, a star, any one of these roundish shapes to get started with. Now, we're going to use the Greyscalegorilla logo, so I'm going to come into Open Project, and I'm going to grab the GSG head logo. I'm going to open it. It's an Illustrator file. It's going to ask me how big I want to import it. 30 centimeters is fine. We don't need it too big. And here it is. Now, we obviously need to clone some objects onto this logo. And to do that, we can clone spheres, but today we're going to use cylinders because the original effect was like kind of flat galaxies, and I think we could do something similar with a cylinder. So let's grab a cylinder, and the first thing I'm going to do is select the radius and turn it to 1, and then the height we're going to set to like 0.3, and we could adjust it later over time. But now we're going to clone the cylinder along the logo. So to do that, I'm going to grab a cloner. I'm going to hit Shift-C on my keyboard over in the Object menu, and up comes the search menu. If you haven't used this, we're going to use this a lot today. Shift-C always opens it up, and it lets you search for anything inside of Cinema 4D and instantly add it to your scene. In this case, I'm just going to type cloner, not that, cloner. And right there, it says cloner MoGraph. It's selected. I'm going to hit enter, and it's automatically in my objects menu. Now, I make the cylinder a child of the cloner. Inside the cloner, I don't want it to just clone randomly. I want it to clone along my logo. So let's go in and make it an object. So right here it says grid. You want to make this say object. And then right here where it says object, you want to drag what you want to clone onto. In this case, it's the logo. And boom. Let me turn off my Redshift view just for now. We'll need it later. But for now, we're just looking right here and we're seeing, okay, well, on the eyeballs, it's cloning a lot, and outside it's not really. How do we make this evenly spaced? Well, inside the cloner, let's go into where it says distribution, it says count. Instead, make it say step, and then you could tell it how many clones every certain amount of steps that is rendered. So instead of every 100 centimeters, let's say every 2 centimeters put a clone, and boom, now we have it. And now we have this evenly spaced clone. We may crank this up later, but I think for this starter effect, this should be fine. Okay, so we have this effect. What's the next thing we need to do? Well, we need to extrude or push these clones along this Z-axis so it's coming towards and away from the camera to really get that perspective feel. So let's go ahead and grab the cloner, and I'm going to hit Shift-C again on my keyboard, and this time I'm going to type in random. I'm going to make a random effector. So click random. It's going to add the random effector to your cloner. Make sure you had the cloner selected. And it's going to move all of our particles around. Well, this isn't quite the look we're going for. So we got to go into the random effector, click on parameter, and make sure that you adjust your position to 0x and 0z. And then now it's only moving front and back. Now this is a little confusing because it's Y, but this is just how the random effector works with this type of spline. So now you can see we're pushing and pulling these clones along the axis, but we're not really getting that perspective look. It's just random clones, and we're not getting that beautiful moment where the camera aligns. In fact, now is probably a good moment to look at the final animation and to kind of learn and see what the magic trick is here. To me, the real trick of this animation is not only is it beautiful and all the galaxies are awesome and little glows, but the logo is only visible for a split second. That's the cool part. It's like, what is it? Oh, it's Apple logo. Wait, it's gone. That's the cool part. And it only works from one point in space, and every other point in space, it just looks random. And while we're here, I just did want to say, like, this is where this tutorial came from. Greg from Apple posted this animation and said, hey, there's an Apple event coming up. Savian, sorry, I'm going to mess up names, said, hey, any tutorials on this? And then I said, no, but it'd be a good idea for one. So I started messing with the technique, and then mind-blowing, the actual animator for this effect, an artist from this effect, hit me up on Twitter and said, hey, we're a fan. I'm a fan for 10 years. I made the animation. So huge shout out to Gabriel for making this animation. I'm going to get as close as I can, but I'm not going to do any justice to how beautiful this turned out. So thank you, Gabriel, for amazing animation and for talking to us through Twitter as well. It was awesome. All right, so here we are back in Cinema 4D, and we're going to set up this taper. And before we do that, let's make sure we have our camera and our scene set up properly. So first thing we'll do now is go up into our render settings, turn on Redshift. If you don't have Redshift, that's totally okay. You could finish this tutorial with any renderer. But it really doesn't matter. But I'll be finishing it in Redshift, and I want to start with a Redshift camera. So I'm going to turn on the renderer. Now, if your Redshift menu is not here after turning on the renderer, you want to go up into Edit Preferences and go down to Renderer Redshift and make sure that this checkbox is on, Redshift Main Menu. Boom. Once you do that, go into your Redshift menu, grab a camera. Again, if you don't have Redshift, you can use an Octane camera or a regular camera. Turn it on, and I want to center this camera perfectly in the middle of the scene, except for on the Z axis. So first thing we'll do is zoom in just a little bit. So you could just grab this focal length and crank it up to something like 60 or 70. In fact, if you have our lens tools, if you're Greyscalegorilla Plus member, you can just click 75 and you're ready to go. From here, go to your coordinates on your camera, and I want you to zero out your X, zero out your Y, leave your Z for now, and I want you to zero out all your rotation so it's aiming directly at your logo. Now, if you imported a logo and it's sideways or something, you'll have to rotate it around. But mine's aiming right at the camera here, should be good to go. Now we just need to move in the Z axis until the logo is centered. And before we make that final, let's go into our render settings. They might be over here for you. You could click on them right here. Go to your output and make this square. I'm just going to say 1280 by 1280. And I guess we got to zoom a little bit back in. So there you go. That's where I want my logo. And we still are not getting that perspective effect. And so this is where we need to add the taper to put it in right in the middle of the scene. So you can see when I hit render, it still looks nothing like the logo. It looks like a mess. But we're going to fix that right now. So click on this button here to open up your 4-panel view, and then go into your right panel. And you can see, I'm going to hit 2 on my keyboard and zoom out. Click to zoom out. And then you can see I have a camera that has one point of view that is aiming at all these particles, and this is why it's not aligning. Now, we want to make sure that the clones, as they push toward the camera, that they scale towards the camera instead of straight out. This is what's making this a mess rather than that perfect moment where the logo is shown right from one perspective. So let's add a taper and let's fix this right now. Go over here, make sure you're in your object menu, hit Shift-C, and you want to type in taper, T-A-P-E-R, and hit enter. You now have a taper. Let's go into the object menu, crank up the taper, and you also want it to be facing your camera. So once I turned it up, I'm going to hit rotate, and I'm going to aim it right towards my camera. I'm going to hold Shift to constrain my rotation, and that way it's directly aiming at my camera. And you also don't want this rounded. So go into your taper, go to curvature, and just set it to 0. Now here's the real trick. You want to make this taper exactly the same as your camera angle. So in the taper, you're going to adjust the strength till it looks parallel to the blue lines or whatever your camera looks like. And you can also shrink these down a little bit just so you can align it better. One other thing you want to do is you want to make sure the back plane is exactly on the same plane as your logo. So grab your move tool. Mine's right here. You might have an older version of Cinema. You can move it forward, and you want the back part of this taper to be right in the right on the plane of your logo, which is right here at 0. You also want to make sure that unlimited is selected and turned on. Okay, so why are we not seeing any difference in the clones? You can see the clones still stick straight out. Well, that's because we have to tell the taper to affect all these clones. To do that, we need to put it in the same hierarchy as the cloner. To do that, we need to add a null, bring the taper in the null, and then grab your cloner and also put it in the null. And boom, now we turn on and off the cloner, and you see that it's affecting not only the front clones that it's in, but because we turned on unlimited, it affects all the clones behind it. So now let's go back to our perspective view and see if that works. Much better. This is getting much closer. We're just off a few degrees on our taper. So with your camera visible, make sure that it's right here. This little dot makes this camera the viewing camera. You want to go into your taper and adjust it until it's pixel perfect in your viewport. And you can see there's a point where the logo looks like it's perfect. Right there looks good. I'm going to hit render just to see what that looks like. Perfect. This is the trick. The trick is all of these clones are still random all over the scene. In fact, if I click off my camera, you can see they're all over the place. But in this one magical part of the frame, it lines up perfectly. And this is what we want. Now, from here on, we're just adding the extra bits to make this beautiful and to make it look more random as we circle around this object. So how do we do that? Well, now let's make a bunch of other clones that'll act as kind of the stars and everything else around here to give this effect more depth and to make it a little bit more random as we move. So I'm just going to duplicate my cloner. I'm going to grab it. I'm going to say copy and paste on my keyboard. And I want to grab the cloner, go to my effectors, and I'm just going to remove this random effector. This random effector, we're going to call this one zoom to camera, random to camera. This is the very specific one that's aiming everything at the camera. I don't want to mess with it. Instead, I want to go to this cloner with these cylinders, and instead of cloning around the object, I want to go back to something where we're just spreading clones all over the place. In this case, I'm going to go to grid, and under the per step, I want to change it from per step to endpoint. And then my endpoint, I'm going to shrink way down. Let's call it 100, 100, 100. This will depend on the scale of your scene. And then I'm going to say, let's go 9 clones in all directions. So now you see we have a bunch of these clones in a cube all over the scene. We're going to spread it open even more just to randomize this, and even towards the camera as well. And we're going to add a few more clones. And we may add even more before we hit render, but let's maybe jump this up to 10 or 11, 12. Now, this does not look great now because they're all very uniform, but we're going to randomize all this stuff. So with the cloner affected, hit Shift-C, type random, hit enter, and this will automatically add a random effector. This random effector, I want to set up random rotation and position as well. Now, position automatically happened because random automatically comes with this position turned on. You can always turn it off if you want, but we want this random position. We also want some random rotation as well. And then we're going to add some random scale to everything in the scene to start to get these chips in different directions. Okay, so now we have our randomness all over the place. How do we make this look more like stars, like less like chips? We're going to do a lot to get there with colors and lights and all that. But let's get the logo cleaned up. So what we don't want are all these clones that are inside the logo messing up with the perfect inside logo. So what do? Well, the best way to do this is to use the same logo and make an extrusion. So I'm literally going to copy my vector here, this GSG head logo. I'm going to copy it, paste it. I'm going to hit Shift-C and type in extrude, EXTR. And there it is. You're looking for this green extrude. You can double click it or you can hit enter. It's going to enter into your objects, and you want to make your logo a child of the extrude. Now, let's go back into, actually, let's just turn off our camera for a second so we can look at this from the side. What we're going to do is use this extrude to subtract any logo or any clone that is inside the logo. Okay, so to do that, we're going to grab the extrude and we're going to push it all the way forward to cover all these clones up front. And then we're going to select the extrude and turn up our offset to go all the way back. And remember, because of this perspective trick, we also need this in perspective. So we want to put this in the same null that we put the taper so that it is also a part of this whole perspective. And if you don't do this, it's not going to delete all the clones in the perspective of the camera, okay? Now that we've done this, we can now go back to our camera, look straight at it, and how do we subtract everything that is inside of this extrude? Well, to do that, you got to set up another effector. So with this cloner, let's name our cloners so that we're affecting the correct ones. Let's call this one the logo cloner. And let's call this one the I don't know, just cloner 2, just so we could separate them. In the second cloner, you want to add a new plane effector by hitting Shift-C, type in plane, P-L-A-I-N, hit enter, and this plane effector is going to scale down all of your clones, and this is how you do it. Select plane, go to parameter, scale, go to effector. Nope, here we are. It's in parameter, click on scale. Under uniform scale, you want to go to -1, and boom, everything disappeared. But of course, we don't want everything to disappear. We just want everything that's inside of this extrude that we made to disappear. So here's how we do it. We go into our second cloner in our effectors, and in this plane effector, we're scaling it all the way down, and all we need to do is tell the fields that only scale it down where this extrude is. So under fields in your plane effector, nothing's here for now, which means everything in that cloner is scaled to 0. And so we're just going to drag in this extrude into the fields. And by default, we're also going to turn off the extrude so we don't see it in the viewport. And to do that, I'm going to hold down Option and double click on these traffic lights right here until they're red. This is going to turn it off in our scene, but we're still going to be able to use this geometry here in fields. But you can see it's not working. And that's because if we set it to extrude, or we click on the extrude, it's set to points, and we want to turn this to volume. Now, when we click volume, everything inside of this is going to be deleted. Now, we're seeing some particles back here that are being moved beyond it, and that's because we didn't put our cloner in this null along with the taper that we made earlier. And as soon as we do that, it should clean it up. Boom. That's what we want. We want this nice clean effect. Now we need to also get rid of some of these big particles that are inside the face. They're just distracting for this specific logo. You might not have this problem if you're using the Apple logo or a circle or whatever. But for this one, I just want to clean up these random particles. So I'm going to add another effector to my plane, and I'm going to make a box effector or a box field. So under fields, I'm going to go down here, and you have a whole list. And this one is right here. It's the box field. Add it to your scene, and it's going to come in, at least for me, in the right blending mode, which is max. They're basically kind of like adding together. And we also don't want the box that big, and we don't want to color our particles using fields. We have other tutorials to show you how to do that. We're just going to turn off color for now and leave it at its default. But we are going to shrink this box only to affect those clones that are inside the face area. So it's going to shrink it down. I'm going to move it down. And then we probably have to extrude it. I guess that's not the right term, but scale this box so it's out in towards the camera, just like this. I'm going to go to my side camera and crank it all the way up. Just going to grab as many of those clones as possible. And I'm going to go back into my my camera that's all set up. And look at that. We got a clean logo ready to go. Now, if we look at the original, I think I'm swiping the right way. Yeah, if we look at the original, there are some little dots and specks and sparkles inside of the logo. And all you have to do to do that is either turn down the plane effector to not affect it all the way to 0. Because remember, in our parameter, we set this to -1. We could set this to something like 0.9. Or we can also go to our fields and just turn down some of the effect of those fields until we get what we want. See, now we have these nice little stardust particles that are going to read really beautifully as we color this up, but aren't getting in the way of the readability of the logo, which again, I think is the real key of this effect, is keeping the readability beautiful on this one frame. So, okay, we got this for the most part. We're going to do one more scaling trick, and that is to keep these large particles around the logo large, but then scale them down as it gets closer to the border here. And so for that, you may have guessed it, we're going to go in the fields in this plane effector that's affecting scale, and we're going to grab a spherical field. So let's click here again, click spherical field. It should come in again at the correct blending mode, which is max. And right now it's doing the opposite. It's scaling everything inside and then leaving everything large. So we're just going to reverse it. Let's click on the spherical field, scroll down, click invert, and this is what we're going for. So now we just need to scale this. It kind of ended up almost perfect. But if it's not in the exact scale you want, you could adjust the out range and the in range. The out range is where it scales all the way to 0. And then the in range is where it starts to scale your particles. Okay. And it's called inner offset. And then this is like the global size. You could adjust it with these little knobs. You could also adjust it in your fields here using scale and inner offset and all this stuff here. Okay. I like this effect where we have these big particles around it. And then I'm going to scale this larger one up a little bit more, tone this down. And this is starting to look good. I'm also going to tone this back so that it doesn't go all the way to 0. We still get these nice little particle effects as it grows. Okay, we may tweak these as we start to add some coloring and some lens effects and some other stuff to make it look more, well, better. This is all just black and white and too clean. So let's do the camera move first so we can start to look at what this looks like in different angles. And then we're going to jump into adding a texture and how to make this look, add different colors to different particles. And we also are going to scale this randomly. So let's do this all at the same time. So let's start with the camera move. So we have our camera. Let's move this up just so we can mess with it. And what we want is to animate around the pile of particles and then have it slow way down as it hits the front. So if we look at this, it's really fast, and then it slows way down, almost stops, and then picks up speed again. And then they kind of do this blend fade into making it loop, okay? That's my guess and how this is done. And so let's try to recreate it. So for this, we're going to add a null, and that null is going to end up right in the middle of our scene, right where our logo is. And we're going to animate the camera using the null, okay? And all you have to do is drag your camera into the null. And now, wherever you animate this this H parameter, it's going to rotate around. And look at that. If we just hand scrub, we're getting this effect. It's perfect right there. And then as soon as we drift off, it doesn't look like the logo. And again, I think that is really the key of this effect. It's like, what is it? What is it? Oh, it's perfect. And then it's gone. So we're on to something here. We just got to animate this. Now, I'm going to use Signal to animate this. This is a plugin we have at Greyscalegorilla. If you're a Plus member, you have it. It's all right here in your Greyscalegorilla tab. If you don't have Signal, you can hand animate this and just use the timeline and keyframes. And you can find other tutorials on that. But I'm going to use Signal because it makes it super easy. If you haven't used Signal in a while, we have this tool called Drop Zone that's also included in Greyscalegorilla. It helps you animate anything. So if you want to animate this H parameter, for example, you literally just drag the H into Drop Zone. It makes a signal tag and makes it animatable right away, right inside a Signal. So now Signal's on this null, and now we're going to animate using Signal all the way around, not quite all the way around the logo, but almost from like 90 degrees to the left to 90 degrees to the right. So let's go to the first frame, and we could just adjust this until it is, we got to set linear first. Now our minimum should work, and we want it kind of behind our logo off to the left. So let's call that, let's see. Let's just go to 0 first, so we're starting fresh. Let's go to the left. There we go. Make sure we're in the right direction. And we want to go somewhere around here. That looks like 115 degrees is a good start, which means on the other side, we're going to go positive 115 degrees. And all this means is now, if I turn off or redshift, we'll see this quicker. It's a linear keyframe. Well, no, there are no keyframes. Signal's driving this whole thing. It's a linear animation from left to right, but we don't settle in on that logo. So we want in the middle here for this whole system to slow down. And I'm going ahead and start to save this. Just as we make changes, we're doing some pretty good stuff here. Let's go ahead and save our project. I encourage you to do this as well if you don't have autosave on. So let me just save project as, and I'll call this the GSG logo tutorial. And boom, we can now make some tweaks to the signal over here. So this is the graph I want to affect. We don't quite have, if you open up, we have these presets in here, and the preset, the exact curve I need is not quite in here. These are super useful, by the way, if you haven't used these presets. The one I'm looking for is kind of a reverse of some of those. So I'm going to, instead of mess with this small window, I'm going to right click, I'm going to go show in separate window, and I'm going to scale it up. Yours might come in smaller, but I'm just going to scale it up so we have more room to mess with. And I'm going to add a new, basically a keyframe, and add a new little node here right in the middle somewhere. And to do that, I'm going to hold down Control and click. And now I have this extra animation point. Now what I need to do is select all of our keyframes. You could do that by hitting Control A, or just you could drag and select all your keyframes, but Control A will select them all. Come down here to interpolation and set this to spline. Now, here's the graph that we need. We need it to go fast off the start, slow down, which is a more shallow curve, and then speed up at the last minute to reach the other side. So to do that, we're going to grab this. I didn't mean to select them all, but that's okay. We're going to grab this one and kind of aim it almost straight up, so it's jumping off the start line. This one, however, we want to grab and make it real flat, so it's slowing down. Something like this. We have this nice S curve, but it's not a typical easy ease curve, which is the opposite. It eases in and goes fast and then eases out. This is the reverse. We want it to go fast, slow down right at the point of where the logo is, and then go. The other thing we could do at this point is tell it exactly what frame we want the logo to be visible. And I want to cheat it forward a little bit. I want to get there quicker and then let the end kind of ease out. So down here, I'm going to say, okay, point Y is 0.5. So I want that's halfway through the animation. We know that halfway through the animation is exactly where the logo is perfectly visible. And then where do you want it on the x-axis? Well, I want to be maybe like 0.4, which is earlier in here. It's going to be somewhere around 30, 40 frames rather than exactly right in the middle. So let's see what we got. Let's see, first of all, see if we could find our perfect frame. There it is. 36 is our perfect frame. And let's just click play and see what we have here. Boom, slows down. We get the little logo reveal, and then it goes. Looking good. We probably need even a little bit more time. So I'm going to close this down. Let's hit pause here, and let's jump this to 120 frames. And what's great about using Signal is we don't have to adjust our keyframes. All we have to do is come down and say match timeline, and everything will snap to the timeline. So now you don't have to readjust anything. If you just feel like slowing things down, it's already done. So now it gives us more time. It's the same animation, just a little bit slower. And I want to get there faster. See that hiccup right before it lands on the logo? I want to get there. I want to get here, not faster, but with more speed, and then slow down. So that means we just got to exaggerate this curve. So again, you can right click here and go to show in separate window. And this is where you may have to adjust this up. So that's going to push it more forward. And you may want to make this more steep. Okay, so it's going to slow down a little bit more. Let's hit play. And of course, we got to do sound effects. Beautiful. And then it goes. This is looking good. If you ever want to test this, and it's right after this, we're going to jump into all the lighting and all the colors and really make this look better. But I want to nail the animation first. If you want to double check your work, I encourage you to do this. This works no matter what renderer you use. If you're ever like, okay, this looks decent timing wise in the viewport, but we all know the viewport is not real time. Okay, it's doing its best to keep up. We got a lot of particles moving around and geometry. I do this all the time. I go to render settings and I turn this to viewport render, and I go into viewport render and I say geometry only. And then I make sure that all frames are selected right here under output. Go all frames. There we go. And then I hit Shift R, and that's going to render. It's going to say, hey, you're not saving this. And I'm like, that's fine. This is just going to be ugly Play Blast gray render. But this is going to give me accurate timing on my camera move before we go into the final render, before we start to light it. And I want to lock this down now so that we're not making changes later. So let's hit play and see what this looks like. Pretty good. Pretty good. I like that. That eases in. It's the logo and then it disappears. And it's going to look even better as we add the lights and all this stuff. So let's keep this for now. If you don't like what you see here, go back and adjust your curves. Maybe you got to readjust your camera angle. Maybe you have to start earlier or start later. But this feels pretty good to me. Let's look at it one more time. Boom, logo, and then it's gone. Okay, so we're feeling good. Let's start to light and kind of finish this thing up. I'm going to save again. And we are going to go to the front. Let's find out what frame this is. 48 now. Let's turn on our redshift render. And again, if you're using Octane or physical render, we're not really pushing the limits of any renderer right now. So you could follow along and just use any texture you want. I'm going to make a redshift texture. And let's go to create. Let's see, materials. Oh, we don't have redshift turned on. See, this, I still get confused over this, guys. If you don't have redshift turned on in your menu, the redshift menu goes away. You can't find tags, like it all just disappears. So if you ever find yourself like, where's all the redshift stuff? You got to have redshift turned on in the render. So we forgot to do that. I forgot to do that. Now we should be good. So now go back to create redshift. There we go. And materials, and I'm going to use a new standard material, and I'm going to drag it onto all of our clones. So here's the cylinder, and let's go to this cylinder as well. Okay, so now we got a material going, and we're going to use nodes. Now, don't be too afraid of the nodes. I know it looks confusing if you're new to this, but it's pretty straightforward. And again, if you're using Octane, you'll have to open nodes to do this as well. But let's just go ahead and double click on this material. And when we do, it's going to open up the node editor. And if it doesn't open up, you can go to basic and click on node editor in your material. But once you see this, this is new in the last couple versions of Cinema 4D. It might open up a different looking node editor and it'll be slightly different, but you should still be able to follow along. Okay, so here we are. And the first thing we need to do is grab a random color. We want all of these particles to be random colors, and we want to drive the gradient. Okay, if you remember the original, we have light blues and dark blues and these kind of like pale tan colored galaxies and all this stuff. We want to control that, and the best way to do that in Redshift is to grab a data. I think it's called color data, colored user data. I always forget what this is. I wrote it down so I wouldn't forget it, and now I have like this little thing. So if you, it's just color user data, super handy. Okay, just remember this node. Now what we do is just drag it and drop it into the color node, and you can see it didn't really do much. We have to tell it what kind of data to use, and if we select it, you're going to see presets, and under here you're going to see objects, geometry, ID, color. Okay. This gives us a random color all across every particle. Literally any color in the rainbow, it just gives it a random color. By the way, if you want to use MoGraph, you could do this right here, MoGraph color. And then if you want to use fields to color your objects, you could just use this to push it into Redshift. But that's probably going to show up in another tutorial at another time. So what do we do with all these random colors? Well, we interrupt the randomness and instead feed it into a ramp that we control the colors. So how do we do that? Well, click on this plus again, type ramp, double click on it, and you can now pump the color user data into this S right here. It's going to ask you where you want it. Go to general and say alt input, and you can just drag these around, kind of getting messy with it, but you got to be more organized when you use more nulls, but we could just kind of loosely do it. Now we have a black to white gradient randomly assigned to all the different clones. And this ramp is what is driving that black to white gradient. You can see it right here. So now instead of black and white, we can go pick one of these blues. It's kind of like a bluey purpley galaxy thing. Let's add another node here. Double click on it and make this more pale, maybe more of a light blue here. We could always adjust this. And then this one, let's make this one the tan, kind of pale tan. Let's try that for now. Okay. And I'm going to move this up just so we get a few more of them, and maybe move this blue over so that we get less of those kind of middle ground colors. All right, this is okay. We don't really know what it's going to look like until we start to randomize these more. The thing that's bugging me the most, and I tend to work this way. Some people do all the geometry, all the animation, and then do all the materials. Sometimes you add a material and you're like, oh, I forgot something. And I did. So we got to go back and just add random scale and rotation to our logo, because everything is the same exact size. And that is not very natural looking, and it kind of fights the effect a little bit. It's too perfect. So how do we mess it up a little without messing up this effect? Well, let's go back to our logo cloner, and we want random. So let's just add another random effector. While this logo cloner is selected, I'm going to hit Shift C. I'm going to say random. And in the random effector, it by default is going to add position. We don't want to do that. We do want to rotate it randomly. So turn on rotation and just crank these up. I'm just going to say like 150, 150, 150. Already we got something better. I don't like how on edge some of those are. So I might cheat some of these down a little bit. Maybe more like 80, 80, 80. Just to keep the rotation a little bit tame. There we go. And then scale. This is going to be the big one. So now we could also scale these not uniformly. Usually you scale uniformly. If you don't do this, maybe you'll get more of like a galaxy look, you know? So like, let's say 0.5, 0.5, and 0.5. And this is going to randomize the scale of all of these particles in different directions, give them all these different kind of shapes. And that is looking a little bit better. And we're going to add some light glows and stuff to make this look even nicer. But let's look at it from the side. I'm just going to move my camera. And now we get these nice particle moves. Let's move over. There it goes. Okay, so that's looking better. And now that looks more random until we get closer to our perfect frame. Okay, now we need to make these feel like they're glowing from the inside. Okay, this is going to help our effect here. So let's open up our material again. And in this case, I have the node editor docked over here. You could double click on your material, click basic, go to node editor. And we're going to take this ramp color and also light up these particles using this color. So we got to do two things. One is turn off this default light that's in the scene. And the best way I do that is to just grab any light and put it in the scene, and it'll replace the default light. So I just go to, let's go to Redshift Lights. Let's go to Area Light. And let's go to View so we can see where our light is coming in here. And it looks like it's aiming backwards from the 0 point. So everything's getting weird colors. If you have Plus installed, you could use our little 90-degree shifters that instantly moves any object 90 degrees in the direction you want. I use these all the time for lights. So now it's aiming down, and you can take it and just drag it up in the scene. And then I'm going to turn this way, way down, like 0.1 down, like almost off. Okay. Why did I almost turn it off? Well, we're going to light these particles up, and then we're going to adjust this light for effect later. So let's go ahead and do that. Double click our material, go into ramp, and take another node out of our gradient ramp and click on, drag it to this S, let go. And you're going to find this big old list of stuff. And what you want to go do is go to emission and say set the color of the emission to the gradient color of this ramp. Okay. Now, each particle that's colored, each one of these gradient colors will now light up with that color. So what does that let us do? It lets us select our material, go to base properties, scroll down, and under emission, you're going to see weight. You can start to move this up. And now you're going to get lit particles from the inside. And we don't need a ton of this because our light's going to come into play. We want these certain things to sparkle. We don't want it all to be super bright. In fact, what we could do is dim some of these colors down just so they're not all so bright. We could do that right in the ramp here and just tone down the brightness on this thing here and make it much more dim. And this is going to allow us to, when it comes to adding some glows and stuff, get different hits of color and little sparkles and little stuff like that. Okay, so how do we get all that going? Well, a couple things that we could do. One is to use a Fresnel on the material, but the second one is to use a little bit of bloom on our camera. So let's set up the bloom first. Select your Redshift camera. Octane has this as well. And go to your bloom. I think in Octane it's called like camera effects or post effects. And you could turn on a little bit of glow. And if you don't see it right away, you could turn down your threshold and up your intensity until it pops up. Okay, see, that's what we're going for. And we're going to crank it first, and then we're going to dial down to make it more subtle later, okay? And for this, I'm going to turn up our brightness a little bit. Now that we dim down a lot of those colors, I think we can afford to brighten it up a little bit. And again, we'll dim it down as we go. Now what we're trying to get is that nice little glowy sparkle around everything. And we also, these cylinders are just too clean on the edges. Compared to the original, the galaxy effect in the original made it so soft on the edges. And we could approximate that a little bit with a Fresnel. So let's go ahead and do that. So let's add Fresnel. I'm going to double click that and it should show up. Let's try that again. Fres, double click. There you are. Hey, our old buddy Fresnel. And we're going to pump this into, I think there's like an alpha channel kind of thing. So go into the S and geometry and opacity should do the trick. But this is opposite of what we want. Right now, it's only showing at the outside of your object around the edges. That's what Fresnel does, and not the inside. So we need to reverse this. Let's go to facing color, make this white. I just selected the Fresnel. Let's do the bottom one and make this black. And now we need to make this first number much smaller, like 0.1. And this is going to push the effect. Oh, we have to turn off use index of refraction. There we go. Aha, see? Now, see how much softer everything got? Now we're getting some transparency on the edges, just a little bit. And it helps make this a little bit softer and a little bit more galaxy-like, a little bit more like the original, and less like just particles floating around. So this, I think, ignores the index of refraction at this point. So we probably now just have to crank up the brightness to compensate for how dark the alpha made everything. So let's just crank until we get little sparkles. And that's what we're looking for. Not for the whole thing to sparkle, but just little pieces and parts of it. There we go. Now we're getting somewhere. You could do some of this in post too if you're using physical render or you just don't want to mess with all this. You could add a little glow in After Effects or whatever, but this looks pretty good. Okay, so now is the big test. Let's go to View and our viewport and scrub our timeline back a little bit, see what it looks like when it's off to the side. Aha, we're getting somewhere now, folks. Let's keep moving around. We got this hole right here I want to fix before we're done. I think that hole is our little gap. So maybe we just scale up some of those little baby particles. So let's go into our plane, into our fields, and I think it was the extrude that we could just ease up a little bit on and make sure there's some particles hanging out here. I don't think it'll affect the readability. Okay, yeah, that's better already. So now when we're off to the side, we won't have that gaping hole. And this looks great. This is what we want, folks. We want it to be random looking. And then, oh, what is that? What is that? And then it gets closer. And then we get even closer and we're like, oh, I know that logo. Oh my goodness. It's the Apple logo. I mean the Greyscalegorilla logo. And then we just drift like it was magical. It was a moment that we all experienced, and then now it's gone. Okay. Okay, so this is looking good. To add a little bit of sparkle, we could always crank up our top light, and this is gonna light everything a little bit more. This is already too much. I'm just gonna set it to 1, just to get a little bit random pops of light as we sparkle around, and we get these little hints and glows as these become brighter and darker as the camera rotates. And so we're gonna see this in the final render more than we are as we just scrub, but see how this is bright and everything else kind of drifts? That's a little bit about, I think, what makes the original so great is there's these little sparkles as it moves, and it's a little bit random. So yeah, a far leap to get all the way to how amazing that animation is. But I think with a few more little tricks, we can get a little bit closer. So one is kind of a cheat. We're just going to add a little depth of field. And this is going to make things a little bit softer, a little bit more glowy, and not as hard-edged as all of this. I would also recommend playing around with not just cylinders, different shapes, different things all in your clones. In fact, this could be a whole other effect if you just swap out these with other objects, or I encourage you to experiment with this and take this to the second step if you're following along. But for now, let's add a little depth of field. In Redshift, we want to go to our physical, go to the camera, click on physical, and knock this f-stop way down, okay? 0.2, I'm talking way down, and then we're gonna adjust it back later. Next thing we need to do is click on the Redshift camera tag, go to bokeh, click on override, click on enabled, and holy crap, everything's out of focus. It's kind of pretty. What do we want to be in focus? That's what's really missing. And we're gonna use this null because we know that this null is right in the middle of our logo. In the camera, let's go to object, focus object right here, and you just drag that null in. And at least now the logo is, let's move this down a little bit. Let's get a little bigger. Now, at least right where the logo is in focus. But because of this trick we're doing where it's pushing towards the camera, all of those particles are too blurry and we lose our effect. So this is a subtle effect. It's not even necessary, but I do think it adds a little bit of kind of softness to it. And again, in space, you don't really have depth of field because everything's so far apart. So this might be fighting a little bit of the perspective trick, but I like a little bit of it as I was messing around with this effect. So go back to our camera. Remember, we cranked it to 0.2. Let's go to like 2. And that's actually almost perfect. Let's go a little bit more just to check. That is a little too soft. See how we're losing that perfect frame? So let's go to 2. And remember, the bigger the f-stop, the less the blur. And this looks pretty good. Let's just scrub around. Let's just pick another frame earlier. This looks nice. That's got a cool effect to it. Let's go to frame 0. And let's go all the way to the end. And this looks great. What you're looking for in your version is, does it look random? Is there like streaks of particles that are throwing you off that doesn't make it random? Well, if so, you want to go tweak your random effectors and the scales and the sizes until everything looks like a clump of whatever, until you get closer to the middle and then it snaps together. That's the effect. That's the real balance here that we're trying to get. I know I repeat it. That's really the essential of this effect. Everything else is cloners and scales and stuff we've probably done a lot in cinema if you've been using cinema a while. This is the real key of it. Okay, so this is looking good enough for us to render. And then we're gonna finish this up very quickly in After Effects, where we're just gonna make it loop. And we're just gonna fade between 2 animations to make it loop. We're gonna make it super simple. So let's go. How do you render this thing? Go to your render settings, and you go to your output. You wanna make sure you're rendering all frames. You wanna make sure you're telling it where you're saving it. I use 16-bit TIFFs. People yell at me for this. Use whatever you want. And you gotta tell it where you want it to save. So in this case, I want to go to tutorials. I wanna go to this Apple logo animation, and I wanna go into renders. Let's call this Apple GSG logo tutorial, and save. I think we're ready to go. Redshift settings. Medium should be fine for this effect. If you're in a rush, you can click low, but medium should be fine. And I think everything else is ready to go. We haven't changed anything else. You could change your resolution if you want. Let's kick this thing off and let's head on into After Effects. Here we go. Shift R. Are we rendering? Let's look. Oh, baby. All right, now that this thing is done rendering, let's finish this up in After Effects. First thing we need to do is import our TIFF sequence under Project, double click, and it's gonna open up your browser. Go find where you saved all that stuff, and it's at the bottom of this list here. It's Apple GSG logo, there it is. And make sure you have TIFF sequence turned on, or sequence, whatever your sequence is. Hit open, and you now have a sequence. To make a composition, just drag it in to this little button right here. This will make a composition. And if you hit 0 on your keyboard, if you have an extended keyboard, it'll just render it. I think spacebar might work for you as well. All right, so here's what we got. What do we do with this thing? We got some nice sparkles. We got some nice glows. But here's the real issue. It doesn't loop. And we're going to fix that right now just by faking a little fade out right here at the end. So let's go ahead and select our sequence and hit Command D if you're using a Mac, and it will make just duplicate it. So now you slide it over, and you want to find the place where this kind of animation overlaps. Right now, it blocks the other animation. So you want this to screen on top of the other one. So over in your modes, if you don't have modes, you could right-click up in here, and it'll show, make sure you have modes turned on. You want to screen the top one on top of the bottom one, and this gives this effect where there's kind of double particles for a second. So you want to find the place where they both are kind of spinning the same amount, where it's almost a match move right about there. And that's where you want to start to fade out this animation and fade in the new one so that we could try to loop it. So let's go to the old one and hit T for transparency. They call it opacity, but T helps me remember the key command. I'm going to hit this button right here, this keyframe button. It's going to start at 100% opacity. And over the course of, 10, 20 frames here, I'm going to move my little timeline here. And then I'm going to scale this all the way down to 0% opacity. So this fades out. And at the same time, I want this top one, hit T for transparency, click the keyframe. I want this top one to go from 0, and then over here, ramp up to 100. Okay, and we probably have to do some tweaking, but let's just see what that does right away. It's a little mushy, and there's another thing that's happening that we have to fix, which is it's stuttering right there at the beginning, which we could fix really quickly just by finding whatever frame is the last frame here. So this is kind of these two yellow frames. There's these two yellow dots. The other way to do it is just to count the frames. I'm going to hold Shift and go page down. That's 10 frames, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18 frames. So all we have to do is now crop the beginning 18 frames. So I'm going to hold Shift, page down, that's 10. And then page down 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 8. Boom. This is our beginning. Let's hit B on our keyboard. That's our beginning of our animation. And the end is already there. It's already the end. So now I'm going to hit 0. If you don't have an extended keyboard, there's some play stuff up here somewhere. Gosh, I'd never use it because I always have an extended keyboard. Yeah, anyway, spacebar should work just fine for you. But let's take a look at this thing. It can use a little tweaking. That fade is too obvious right there. I'm going to push it a little bit earlier and try to speed up both of them. So I'm actually going to move the loop point a little bit. I'm going to push it forward, move this back just so everything's moving quicker. And I'm going to overlap this more so that it fades on and then the particles leave. So I'm going to speed up this bottom one. Actually, I'm going to speed up this one. So now it's fading. This might be a little bit better. So I'm just tweaking it to make that less obvious of a fade. That's not that bad. I think we have to readjust our front since we moved it. But that's not bad. let's just tweak it. We're just tweaking until it's got the better feel. That's actually better, but now our offset is off. So let's calculate our offset. 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. So now we just got to go 14 from the start. 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. B for beginning. This is our new beginning. It's a new beginning, folks. Let's hit render. Oh, baby. Baby. We may have an extra frame. I saw a loop frame, so we could hit this picture button right at the first frame. Click. And then we can go to the last frame. And you can see they're both the same. This is bad. Okay, if we hit eyeball, they're the same exact frame. So we have two identical frames, which means you're going to have this hiccup. This is really common when making these loops. See, watch it. Boop. One little extra frame. So we just need to pinch this one frame forward. I'm just going to drag it. Grab it, drag it. One frame. Now, did we fix it? Let's see. Oh, I'm leaning close to my monitor. All right, once you have a perfect loop, you render this puppy out, and you are all set, my friends. Thanks again for watching, everybody. And if you made it this far, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. And if you make something with this tutorial, we'd love to see you post it down below. And with that, we'll see you in another tutorial really soon. Bye, everybody.